Good evening. I'm delighted to see so many people here, and there are as many downstairs, I'm told. It's sort of a simulcast. I'm here because Mary Brosnahan ordered me to be. Now, Mary is one of my heroes. She is a remarkable, remarkable woman who for a very long time has been doing some wonderful work with the homeless. Indeed, when I was mayor, and among the problems we had back then, and that was a very long time ago, was people in the intake places where they were sleeping on top of desks and whatnot, and the judge ordered our administration to make some changes, and if they didn't do them quickly, they'd be held in contempt of court. So one of the deputy mayors was threatened with jail. So when I see Steve Banks, who is the lead lawyer, now he is the top lawyer for the Legal Aid Society, wonderful, wonderful man, does great work. And I tell him he's my favorite lawyer who sued me. But I have always cared about homelessness. When I was Manhattan Borough President, we produced a booklet, a document called "Shelter is Not a Home." And it really isn't very profound if you think about it. Homelessness is the absence of a home. And the thing is that way back, and I don't know if there's anybody here old enough to remember when the Bowery was lined with people who were without homes, and that was born then the term Bowery bum. Well, obviously the Bowery doesn't look anything like that today, but there are all kinds of homeless people. And some people think that homeless are people who are addicts, or they're people who have some mental disability. And it is true that some homeless persons are in those categories, but they're God's children too, and they too need a home. But the big thing is that there's so many people who live from paycheck to paycheck, and you miss a check, you miss your rent, you get evicted. There are other reasons people get evicted. Now, for instance, I used to live in public housing, and I got evicted. I lost the election, so they put me out of Gracie Mansion. That's public housing, you know. But I think that if more people appreciated that there but for the grace of God go I, as you see someone who's homeless, and frequently there's a story. I from time to time, I've talked to way back when Mary was a little girl. I used to go down with George McDonald down to Grand Central Station, and George used to give away sandwiches to people there, and was arrested several times because they didn't permit that. And so I asked him one day, I said, well, who are these, where did they come from? And he said, well, why don't you go ask? I said, oh no. He said, no, it's okay. And so I talked to this one fellow I'll never forget. He was white, 35 to 40, was a bookkeeper and studying to be an accountant, wanted to become a CPA. And he spent so much time at work and studying, and that his girlfriend or wife took up with someone else, and it just destroyed him. He started to drink, lost his job, couldn't pay the rent, became homeless. Like that. And he was just like you or I, just ordinary guy. And so some of us, when we see someone who's homeless, if we would just think a little bit and have some compassion, if we here had that much of the compassion that Mary Brosnahan has shown, and I want to attribute to Marc too. Marc Singer, is it? Yes. He's the guy, when you'll see the film, which I have seen, and I asked him a while ago, I said, what made you go down there? Why did you stay? He was like 21 years old when he did this. And it was curiosity, compassion, concern. If more of us cared about the rest of us, we'd all be better off. I've already talked far longer than I had intended, So please forgive me, but we old people, we tend to ramble. So I know that you will enjoy this. You will certainly be enlightened. So thanks for listening.
If it wasn't for the coalition and for Margaret Morton, who's sitting in the audience, none of these guys would have got housing. When the police came in, they really came in pretty strong, and everybody had to get out. And Margaret, who's a photographer, been documenting homelessness for many years, was in the tunnel for years before I was, and had a good relationship with Mary. Margaret went to the coalition and said, this is what's going on. And Mary and her team were the ones that went to Henry Cisneros and Andrew Cuomo and really fought for these guys to be eligible for these vouchers.
Well, I think that Marc really caught the tail end of what many of us who have lived in the city a long time knew homelessness as, which is just mostly single people living on the street. And there's just been a phenomenal growth in the number of homeless families in New York. And ironically, it's the Section 8 program up until 2006. It was the main vehicle by which, Koch, Dinkins, Giuliani moved homeless families out of the city, and the Bloomberg administration made a sort of ideological decision to stop giving priority for Section 8 to homeless families, and from that point on, it's just skyrocketed. So tonight there are about 39,000 people just in the public shelters, not including folks on the street, and 16,000 are children. And over the course of a year, that's sort of a point in time estimate, or actually the city's numbers, but over the course of a year, over 113,000 different people, including 40,000 kids, go through the municipal shelter system in New York. So that's sort of like night and day compared to, what Marc captured in this film. Well, there's a big standoff right now because when Bloomberg eliminated the Section 8 priority for homeless families, first they had a modest program called Housing Stability Plus, but you couldn't be employed and get this time-limited stipend. And so more recently, they have something called the Advantage program. And again, it's just time-limited. So Section 8 is designed not to be time-limited, and you pay 30% of your income towards the rent. So it's a very flexible program. And as Marc said, people eventually graduate off, and then you have more availability for new people to come on. But this Advantage program is time limited, and we found that a third of the people in Advantage are coming back into the shelter system, so it's a very expensive revolving door. So Cuomo released his budget about 8 weeks ago, and he eliminated funding. The state pays for half of Advantage. He eliminated funding for it, and Bloomberg responded by saying that they're just going to end the program. And so I think it was Thursday, they started sending out notices. There's 15,000 families with Advantage right now, and have told them that starting on April 1st, their Advantage subsidy is going to stop. So it's sort of a two-tiered crisis right now. One is that the program itself is not very effective, but still you have 15,000 families with that times 2 or 3 number of kids who are permanently housed, at least temporarily. And so it's sort of like this monumental game of chicken that's going on right now. And you have a lot of people that are really freaking out. Can I ask a quick question? Marc, how did you get that great tracking shot at the beginning? Was that did you use the tracks that were there? Or?
I did use the tracks. There was
an astonishing shot.
I knew I wanted to get a moving shot, and so we didn't have the money for a dolly. But everybody bought, so we built one, basically. We actually built 3, and that was the last one. The first one burnt down, and the second one, somebody made their house, and they would literally wheel it wherever they wanted it. And then the last one, so I didn't want to say, I want my dolly. But Henry built the dolly. After being around people for enough time, you learn their strengths and weaknesses and what they have done in their past. And Henry used to work on the railroads. He laid track. So he knew a lot about the track. And one night we were walking down the tunnel, and I just said, how wide's that track? And he told me the dimensions straight away. Not that qualified him to build the dolly, but he just knew about tracks. And so I said, can you build me something that could run along that track, can hold a couple people, lights, camera, everything that I need. And he said, yeah. So the next morning I wake up and I come out of the house and I'm cleaning my teeth outside just because you spit on the track. And I looked down and there's a fire. So I walked down to see who's up, and Henry's there. And we didn't have a drill, we didn't have like power tools, so he was heating up a metal rod and he's burning the holes through the wood, and instead of a drill. And he took the wheels off a shopping cart and put it on this thing, and he built a dolly that ran down the tracks. So that's how I got the moving shots. Everybody was like that. Everybody had something that they, you know. I think anyone can do anything if you just have a little bit of faith in yourself. And all these guys were amazing. In the beginning, you know, none of us had made a film. None of us had ever seen a film camera. And after a couple, you know, our first few weeks were a little bit rough, but after that, they would say to me, "Where are you filming tonight?" And I'd say, "I'm going to get a shot of this." And by the time I got there, the lights were ready, sound was ready, camera was loaded. It was like ready to go. Like when Dee's house burned down, I was fast asleep. They banged on the door. They were like, "There's a fire. You got to get the camera. Let's get down the tunnel." And I'm getting there. I'm down there, and there's people ready. It was amazing to have a crew that all lived on location. You know, but were, you know, extremely brilliant at the same time.
And you lived there with them?
I stayed there with them, yeah.
For how long?
For the duration of it, basically, but I wasn't homeless. Like, I can't put myself in this. For me, I was camping in New York. It was cool. I built a house. I ended up giving her the wood, and she didn't like where I built the house, so she broke down the house, and she moved it down the tunnel into a different location. But for me, it was great. You know, I was young, and I was learning a tremendous amount about myself and about people. And we were making a film, and we were completely possessed to make the film and for it to work. And so I had a great time. You know, there's nights that it's very cold, and it's nights that but for me, it wasn't the same as somebody that's, you know, in a tunnel and they're actually homeless. But yeah, I slept there a lot. Yeah.
You can tell that Marc just built up that relationship of trust that's sort of distinguishes Marc and Margaret Morton. You can see it come through in their work because people open up their soul to them. You know, that's not something you can just sort of fly by night and, hey, open up to me. That took months and months and months.
There were different areas and different groups of people would live. I always felt that there was a lot of camaraderie. There was also people that lived down there and never talked to anyone. Like, I said hello to this one dude for years. Every single day, every morning, he'd come out, he'd stretch on, you know, and he never said a word. And so there were people that just never spoke to anyone. But if you were neighbors with people or people around you, then you did develop a lot of friendships. I mean, I saw the most incredible acts of kindness in the tunnel. The people that didn't have anything, and they would give away their last can of food or something to someone that needed it. I do think also that the film, you know, they were the whole crew. So on some nights there were 10 people doing stuff, 15 people. If it was an outside dolly shot and someone was watching the train, 3 guys are running the dolly down the track, 1 guy's holding the sound, a bunch of light guys, people hauling electric wire. I mean, it was like a big crew. And other nights it was me and Ralph, who normally did my sound, in a house. And so I think the film brought people together too, in some way. Yeah.
What happened to the dogs? Remember how hard it was to find an apartment for those guys?
Yeah, the dogs.
Did everyone hear that?
I'm sorry. I asked what became of the dogs because I remember that was a sticking point with trying to relocate those 2 guys.
It was the same as any apartment. You asked the landlord, do you take dogs? And some did and some didn't. And in some cases, they did, and it was great. And in other cases, they took Section 8, but they didn't take pets. And sometimes they found great homes for the dogs, sometimes they didn't. They did. You know, I saw a girl actually, the girl at the end of the film, you only see her, she's in the house with Henry and she's like, I'll go to the park, I'll go. She was pregnant and she went into labor in the tunnel We put her on the dolly and wheeled her down the track as fast as you could get her out. There were a lot of teenage kids that would come down to the tunnel, run away. Only one time did somebody try and bring a little kid in, and nobody allowed it. I would say nobody allowed it. Look, the tunnel, you could kind of do whatever you wanted, but it wasn't the place. And so there's services that there's social services that can cater to you. It's like, well, I'm finding out it's very different now, but back then, if you were a single male, it was much harder than if you were a family. And so, no, there was really just a lot of teenagers. In the summer, a lot would sort of come out onto the street, and occasionally somebody would be pregnant, but no, there's no kids. There's one of the myths. There's a lot of stuff written on the tunnel, and they would write in the books that there are lots of kids and families, and there really isn't at all. More than anything, this film helped a lot of people, whether not directly, but indirectly. A lot of people had their self-esteem, which was completely shattered, because when you go on the street, you don't ever think you're going to get off the street. I mean, it takes a huge amount of work and people and manpower, and Mary does it every day, to get somebody off the street. But your self-esteem is gone, completely, and you think that you're worthless, and you've told yourself that you're worthless, and to the point that you'll go and live in a tunnel and really remove yourself from everybody. And so, the film gave everybody back that confidence.
Well, it also just brought so much to the general public, I think. The magic of watching it again is just, as Marc said, it just presents homeless people as people. I mean, you look at Dee, and then it's pretty far into the film where you hear her backstory.
Yeah.
And how many Dees have we all walked by on the street and just made assumptions about?
Yeah.
But you
And
get the texture, you get the humor.
Yeah, they'd still be arguing about the cup. If they were in the room now, she'd say to him, "Throw away my cup, man."
It's amazing how quickly they became domesticated.
Yeah. So that's what the film did. So, I never ever did this for the money. It was, like I said, it was a long journey, and you don't make one of these because you're going to make money, especially not back then. And so, but I'm thrilled with what happened, and thrilled that it came out the way that it did, and that we all dreamed this. We sat on the tracks around a fire, and we all said, "Man, can you imagine if we finished a film and it went to a film festival?" And then we went to Sundance, and then it won Sundance, and it won 3 awards at Sundance. And I'd call up, and everyone, would be like, "Sundance? What's Sundance?" But I mean, we did a group excursion to see Hoop Dreams. There was 13 of us went to the movie theater and watched Hoop Dreams, And we came out going, "We're going to do that. We're going to make a documentary." And so those are the things that I, think about and think were pretty cool. There were a lot less women than men in the tunnel, but there were women in the tunnel. I did film other women, but in editing, you're in the end of the day, you've got to make a film, and a lot of people that I filmed just never made it to the film. So there were more women than were represented. I think it's much harder for a woman on the street in general than a man. And if a woman has an addiction, it's incredibly difficult, because people do things on drugs that they would never do, especially these type of drugs, crack and heroin, that they would never ever do if they were sober. And it's a physically challenging environment. I see young girls, especially in the summertime, when a lot of teenagers would run away from home because it's a little easier in the summertime, and at least it's less threatening on the street than when it's 16 degrees and blizzarding to run away. But I'd see girls come on the street, and real pretty girls, and a couple of weeks on the street, and it beats the hell out of you. And in the tunnel, you can't wash as well, and it's always dirty. And so I think it's much harder. But like I say, Mary's
I don't have much to piggyback on that. There's a wonderful woman, Ellen Baxter, who's been in Washington Heights for 30 years now, building housing for single adults, and now more recently families. So if you sort of separate out the single adult population, there's always about 3 to 4 times more men in the shelter population, and the street population tends to mirror that. And one of the things that Ellen told me very early on is, if you look at where these folks are coming from, you can sort of examine or connect them back to their kinship networks, and it takes a lot more for a woman to be tossed out than a man. More mental illness or acting out because of drugs and so on. They're more likely to be able to hang on, perhaps to live on somebody's sofa or that sort of situation. So yeah, it does take a lot for them to get pushed out.
I never had any idea how the film was always going to end. I always figured we'd make this film and it would be whatever it was, and then we'd sell it and we'd make money, and then everybody would have an apartment. And I'm really lucky that wasn't what was required to help everybody get an apartment. But then when the police came down, I'm there, I'm in the tunnel, and then Margaret got involved and the coalition got involved, and there's a chance to get everybody housing. And at that point, I really stopped filming. I mean, I never really started filming. I filmed a scene in Dove's office. There's a guy, Dove Weissman. He was with a group called Project Renewal, who was working with the coalition. And then I filmed everyone breaking their houses and a couple guys moving in. But there's 10 months where I'm basically every day grabbing somebody, taking them down to an office. You got to fill out this piece of paper. You got to, you're just doing this stuff. So, because this is a golden opportunity. I mean, these Section 8s, they didn't come around like that for a single male. It just didn't happen. And also, they were for subway tunnel homeless only, and then they got moved to Amtrak tunnel because of the coalition, and so it was a golden opportunity. So I got really lucky. But I got lucky throughout this whole film. I mean, in fact, the film came out, I got lucky. So I just kept staying in there, and at that point it was, all right, we got to try and make this ending, and everyone broke their houses, and it seemed like a cool thing to film. It was the best stuff I filmed, and best editing. And I didn't actually edit that part. I was fast asleep, and Melissa had cut that. So I'd say the best parts editing on this film is when I was asleep on the couch, to be honest. I don't think it had anything to do with it, because Amtrak, I mean, there was a lady police officer called Captain Combs. She came down with a big group of guys. Look, you walk into a tunnel, it's dark, you're going in there with all of this mythology in your head that people are going to eat people and you're going to get killed. And, it's a really dangerous place, and it looks very dangerous, and it looks very intimidating. And there's areas where it really looks intimidating. And you see all of these little houses, and you don't know who's on the other side of the door. And so they came in really aggressively that day. And so they didn't care about. I had a camera. I mean, that camera was the first thing that was. I was lucky they didn't throw the camera on the floor. And so Margaret went to the coalition. Margaret went to Mary and said, "This is what's happening." Then there was an opportunity to get housing. The vouchers came around. I was filming. What me doing the film or Margaret taking photographs did in the tunnel, well, we were the bridge, because you have the Coalition for the Homeless who's advocating for the homeless, and then you've got Amtrak who doesn't want anyone living in their tunnel. And now all of a sudden you get housing thrown into the middle of this. So Amtrak can't just kick everyone out now, because that would really look terrible if there's housing for these guys. It's just a matter of going through the procedure. And the coalition, while having massive outreach, wasn't in that tunnel. And so, plus these guys on the street get told all the time, come into the shelter, I'm going to get you this, I'm going to get you that. So there was a lot of distrust. Yeah. And so if the film did anything, it wasn't the film that did it, it was just the fact that I was in the tunnel and knew everybody, and Margaret was in the tunnel and knew everybody, and they trusted us, and we could say, this is good. This isn't a bad thing, and don't worry about this. You know, I'll help you fill out this form. This lady you can trust. I mean, Margaret took Mary down into the tunnel and introduced her to tons of people, but we were there every day. So that's the part. I mean, the film I don't think had any effect on anyone. You know, as far as getting them housing, but just we were in the tunnel. So that probably did, just because we were there. One of the things that fascinated me about the people living in the tunnel, and the reason why I spent so much time there, is because these were guys that hadn't given up. They weren't walking down the street talking to themselves. They had built amazing houses for themselves, and they had turned them into homes, and they were doing things for themselves. And I used to think, man, if I was really homeless, if I really got kicked out and I was done, I was really, really out there, would I have done the same thing? Or would I have felt sorry for myself and got really depressed and gone down? Because there's two really distinct roads that you can go down when you become homeless, I think. And they hadn't given up. And so if they hadn't given up, and they had fought and fought and fought, sometimes for years, and then got housing at the end of that, which is always the ultimate goal if you're a guy on the street, is to get off the street, then how could I quit, you know, halfway through making a film because I couldn't edit, or because, you know, I couldn't do my sound mix, or because I didn't have the money to, you know, you just got to keep fighting and fighting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say there's a poll actually just released recently about just difference in attitude of people in Chicago versus New York. And, you know, as I said, over the course of a year, you have over 113,000 people going through the shelter system. So the chances are that you know somebody who's been directly touched by this. And so the big takeaway from that was just that people in New York are much more fearful of becoming homeless themselves. And one of the big pushes with our advocacy at the coalition is to get people to understand that, you know, perception may not be reality. You know, you're seeing, as you move through your day, mostly people who have a higher preponderance of drug or alcohol or mental illness on the street, but you know, 2/3 are families with children, and so you're probably walking by them and not even noticing them. So I do think that New Yorkers as a whole, I mean, some of this was on the tail end of Giuliani, and, you know, when he just came out and announced he was going to start arresting people, I think that there's a tremendous backlash against him. I think that people thought, well, that's not what the city is about. And one last thing is that because of some early legal work that the Coalition and Legal Aid did, there's a right to shelter here in New York. So you don't see entire families sleeping on the street as you do in Florida or Chicago or most other places. And so I think that, you know, right now, again, we're sort of teetering on this brinksmanship. You know, will we actually start to see entire families on the subway? Again, I think that's where New Yorkers draw the line, and I think we feel strongly that there's a better way to protect people and not allow them to become homeless. I don't know
I don't know what to add to that. London, I left London when I was 17, came to America, and
a lot more public housing.
Yeah, but I didn't tell you the truth, I didn't think about a guy on the street when I was 17. I just, you know, I just didn't. And then I got to New York, and they were everywhere. I mean, but when I came to America, I really had a big life change. You know, I got on the plane and I was coming to America, and a lot changed for me. And then when I moved to New York, I started off in Florida and then moved to New York. It was warm in Florida. It was a good place to start. And that's when I moved to New York, I was in the East Village, and there was a lot of homeless people in the East Village at the time. And I don't know what the difference in myself was. I was drawn to it. I think it's real tough. You know, it's tough to help yourself, right? And in New York, it's a tough city. You know, it moves 100 miles an hour. Rents are high. You've got a lot going. Everybody in this room has a massive amount going on in their life at any one time, and so to stop and help another person is really difficult. It takes a lot. It takes such a tremendous amount to help yourself, I think in New York that it can be challenging, and so, and it takes more than that. It takes a tremendous amount of time. Like, there were Margaret, myself, Mary's team, and we had vouchers that people could get out of this situation and into a better one, and it was a massive amount of time. And I used to, think a social worker that has 50 or 100 people that they see every day, it's just not enough time and not enough people to actually really affect the change. And so I think it's not just New Yorkers, but I think everyone everywhere, life moves quickly and life's pretty tough sometimes, and so it's hard enough to help yourself.
If there aren't any more questions, I'd like to thank Marc and
Thank you.
Mary very much for being here and for the music.
Thank you.